The crystalline sound of my son's laughter, fueled by his wife's cruel words, shattered the last fragile shard of my heart, replacing my maternal love with ossified glacial rage. Yesterday morning, the call came exactly as I had scripted it in the cold clarity of dawn. My son, Dennis, a man of 40 years who still carried the entitled air of a college sophomore, was on the line. His voice was not merely anxious. It was shredded by genuine panic. "Mother, why are all the cards declining? We were at the Grande Bistro, organizing the next Founders Gala, and none of the corporate accounts or the supplemental cards worked. Serena's mother is sitting right here and the waiter is hovering. People are watching us. It's a complete and utter embarrassment." His desperation, raw and unfiltered, should have instantly triggered the familiar maternal instinct, the irresistible, lifelong urge to rescue him. Instead, it delivered a seismic wave of satisfaction through my core. I, Clara, a woman of 72 who had once navigated the turbulent waters of high school administration, had finally, irrevocably, severed the lifeline that was choking my own existence. To understand the perverse satisfaction of that moment, you must witness the final toxic act of perfidy that had played out less than 12 hours earlier. For the past 12 years, since the passing of my steadfast husband, Arthur, I hadn't merely become a generous mother. I had been meticulously transformed into an inexhaustible, consequence-free financial instrument for Dennis and my daughter-in-law, Serena. Every failed innovative startup, every opulent lease on a downtown office, every single whim of Serena's relentless pursuit of social validation was financed by the disciplined savings and pension funds I had accumulated over 45 years of teaching and administration. Last night, my home, the very sanctuary I had spent decades cultivating, was hosting Serena's annual planning meeting for the Elite Founders Circle, a pretentious, expensive nonprofit she leveraged for networking. As I moved quietly through the room, serving single-origin coffee to women wearing more jewelry than I owned in investments, Serena, believing my hearing was as diminished as my perceived intelligence, leaned into her closest associate. "Honestly," Serena drawled, tapping a manicured nail against her diamond tennis bracelet, "Clara is fantastic. She's the perfect silent partner with a pulse. She pays the seed funding for Dennis's genius ideas, and she keeps me in the right salons. She's good for absolutely nothing but our quarterly budget." It was the but that sliced through me. It was the absolute casual dismissal of my identity. And then came the blow that truly registered. Dennis, my own flesh and blood, leaned back in his Italian leather armchair, an armchair I had paid for, of course, and laughed. It wasn't a nervous chuckle. It was a deep, guttural sound of affirmation. He found it funny. I stood frozen, the heavy porcelain coffee carafe suspended midair. My hands began to tremble violently, not from sorrow or vulnerability, but from a terrifying, crystalline rage. In that singular moment of exquisite, agonizing clarity, I grasped the fundamental truth that had always been hidden beneath layers of obligation and denial. I wasn't a mother, a mentor, or a family pillar to them. I was simply the digital vault they accessed via two very convenient living legs. The emotional ledger of the last decade flashed before my eyes. 8 months of rent for Dennis's gap year after his first venture collapsed. The $4,000 for Serena's executive wardrobe. Refresh. The staggering $8,500 for their second honeymoon to the Maldives because they deserved to unplug. The financial bleeding had become systemic, relentless, and completely invisible to anyone outside this toxic triangle. When I once timidly mentioned I'd like to see the ocean, Dennis had waved me off. "It's a business trip, Mother. You wouldn't understand the networking. It's too high stakes." And I, the fool, had always understood. I had always paid. The straw that ultimately broke the back of my dignity was the latest investment. The $20,000 down payment on the new, electric-powered Tesla sedan Serena insisted was necessary for her brand image. I had depleted a certificate of deposit that was meant for my own long-term medical care, yet I signed the check. But the venomous words of yesterday, hearing my role reduced to a utility, was the catalyst that melted the checkbook chains. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I lay awake, not in grief, but fueled by a cold, surgical clarity. At 3:17 a.m., I rose, walked to my study, and initiated the seismic shift I should have executed a decade ago. I powered up my aging laptop, the one they often mocked as ancient technology, and began the process of financial disembowelment. The cancellation. First, I logged into the primary business accounts and methodically canceled every single supplemental credit card they held in my name or attached to Dennis's various LLCs. 6 cards, Platinum, Sapphire, Executive Black, all rendered useless instantly. The severance next. I accessed the Emergency Family Savings Fund, a portfolio I had meticulously maintained, only to see it drained by their lavish, spontaneous demands. I closed the fund and diverted the remaining balance into a newly created, highly secured account accessible only through 2-factor biometric identification. The lockout. Finally, I spent nearly an hour restructuring all my online banking profiles. Passwords were changed to randomized complex strings. Biometric logins were reinforced. I removed their names, and any name remotely associated with Serena's vast family network, from all authorization lists, automatic transfer agreements, and power of attorney documents. I made myself, financially, an island fortress. By 6 a.m., the rising sun cast long, peaceful shadows across my kitchen. I poured myself a robust cup of French roast and settled into my antique rocking chair. A sense of profound, tranquil equilibrium washed over me. The anxiety, the constant low thrum of worry about the next financial ambush was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, steely anticipation. I knew the phone would ring, and I would finally deliver the explanation they had never bothered to ask for. The call came precisely at 9:15 a.m., the screen illuminated with Dennis's contact photo, one of him grinning widely, wearing a suit I had purchased for his last pitch meeting. I let the phone ring 4 times, a slow, exquisite torture. Each ring was a chime celebrating my newfound freedom. When I finally answered, his voice, as expected, was high-pitched and hysterical. "Mother, I need you to listen to me. This is catastrophic. The Grande Bistro, Serena's mother, Mrs. Davenport, is here. She's paying for this $350 breakfast with a cashier's check. You have to fix this now. They are laughing at us." The irony was a rare vintage wine, intoxicatingly sweet. They had chosen the Grande Bistro, the very epicenter of the social cachet Serena so desperately craved, to impress her demanding, socially aggressive mother. The same restaurant where I had never been invited, despite having paid for countless important client dinners there in the past. Now they were trapped, surrounded by the elite they courted, utterly exposed in their financial nakedness. "Good morning, Dennis," I replied, my voice a model of composure. "The cards are canceled because I have finally decided that I am no longer going to finance your highly unsustainable lifestyle." "I sincerely hope Mrs. Davenport enjoys her eggs Benedict." "What? Are you insane? We are in public." "This is ridiculous, Mother. How am I supposed to explain that my own mother has suddenly gone rogue and left me stranded?" "What's ridiculous, son?" I countered, the calmness never wavering. "Was hearing your genuine, heartfelt laughter yesterday when your wife publicly declared I was only suitable for paying your bills. What's ridiculous is realizing that for 12 years, I have been systematically treated like a low-interest financial utility, rather than the woman who raised you. Your embarrassment, Dennis, is entirely self-inflicted." A thick silence settled on the line, punctuated only by muffled, furious whispers in the background, undoubtedly Serena and Mrs. Davenport demanding to know the nature of this betrayal. I pictured the waiter, a model of polite impatience waiting for the resolution. "Mother, please, don't do this right now. We can talk later, but I need you to reactivate them. Just for today. I promise. No more promises, Dennis. No more just for today. For 12 years, every crisis has been solved with my money and your empty promises. I learned a profound lesson yesterday. You do not respect me. You do not value my sacrifice, and you have certainly never loved me in a way that didn't involve my checkbook." "That's not true. Serena was joking. You know how she is. We love you, I know exactly how she is, Dennis. And I know precisely how you are, too. That is why I have made this decision. Now solve your problem. You are both educated, employed adults. Figure it out. I imagined the flush creeping up his neck. Mother, we can't just stand here. Do you want us to call the police? Should we wash dishes? This is unconscionable. Now you understand the feeling of being trapped and humiliated. The difference is you're 40 years old. You are capable of standing on your own 2 feet, even if they are covered in designer loafers you couldn't actually afford. Dennis's voice, which had initially been laced with hysteria, now shifted to a weaponized, familiar tone. Are you ill? Are you feeling all right, Mother? This isn't like you. You've never been so... cruel. Cruel. That word struck me with the force of a physical slap, not because it was true, but because it highlighted the breathtaking audacity of their perspective. I, the one who had sacrificed a comfortable retirement to fund their insatiable avarice, was being accused of cruelty. Cruel. After years of postponing my own long-overdue dental work so they could afford a 5-star hotel. Cruel, after spending every holiday alone while they jetted off using the money I had gifted them for Christmas. Cruel, after working until 65 to ensure they had a decent inheritance. An inheritance they were already spending while I was still drawing breath. Cruel was your laughter yesterday. Dennis, I stated, the coldness in my voice surprising even myself. Cruel was making me feel invisible for a decade, except when my bank account was required. Cruel was making me believe that my only remaining value as a woman, and as your mother, was my ability to transfer funds electronically. Serena didn't mean it like that, Mother. It was a stressful moment. Serena meant exactly what she said, and you wholeheartedly endorsed her position. Both of you have made my place in your lives crystal clear. I could hear louder, more agitated voices in the background now. Serena was definitely involved, probably making dramatic, audible complaints to her mother. The pressure must have been immense, the forced patience of the Grande Bistro staff wearing thin. Look, Mother, Dennis tried again, adopting a reasoned adult tone, a mask he rarely wore. I understand you're upset. This is absolutely not the way to handle things. We can sit down and establish boundaries, but right now I need you to get us out of this. Just this one more time and then we will change things. I promise. Just this one more time. I let out a short, hollow laugh that sounded alien to my own ears. Do you know how many times I have heard that phrase, Dennis? Do you know how many last chances and one more times I have financed over the past 12 years? No, not this time. This time, the solution must come from you. How are we going to explain to Mrs. Davenport that my own mother abandoned us in a public restaurant? How can I face the people who know us? Everyone will be talking about this. There it was, the core motivation, raw and exposed. He wasn't worried about repairing our fractured relationship or reflecting on their monstrous behavior. He only cared about the facade, the fragile edifice of his reputation in that shallow social ecosystem. It was always about image. That, my son, is your immediate problem to solve, I replied, rising from my chair and walking toward the kitchen window, watching the robins at the feeder. For years, I worried exclusively about your image, your comfort, and your happiness. Now it is time for me to worry about mine. You can't do this. You are my mother. Precisely. I am your mother, not your private equity firm. I am your mother, not your employee. I am your mother, not your personal safety net. And as your mother, I should have had the courage to teach you how to stand on your own 2 feet years ago. The subsequent silence was longer this time. Heavier. I could practically visualize the mental gymnastics he was performing, calculating who he could call, how to salvage the situation without admitting utter defeat. Mother, please. Serena is crying hysterically. Mrs. Davenport is demanding to know what kind of family we are. The maitre d' has asked us 3 times if everything is quite all right. Have some mercy. Mercy. Another word that made my blood run cold. Where was their mercy when I stayed up late, manually shuffling my fixed income to cover their latest business failure? Where was their compassion when I deprived myself of necessary dental care so they could take an extravagant holiday? Mercy, I whispered into the receiver, is earned over years of mutual respect, Dennis. And you and Serena forfeited yours yesterday morning. I pressed the end call button. The line went dead. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the incredible, unfamiliar surge of adrenaline. For the first time in years, I had prioritized myself. For the first time, I had delivered a firm, unapologetic no. For the next 30 minutes, the phone was a relentless, buzzing irritant. First Dennis again, then Serena, and finally, a number I didn't recognize, likely the enraged Mrs. Davenport. Each rejected call fortified my resolve. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and stepped onto my screened-in back porch, breathing in the quietude I had neglected for so long. But the silence, I knew, was merely the intermission. At 11:00 a.m., the unmistakable, aggressive rumble of Dennis's high-end electric sedan, the one I had helped finance, screeched to a halt in my gravel driveway. 2 car doors slammed with violent force, followed by the sound of furious, determined footsteps approaching my front entrance. The knocking began immediately, loud and relentless, vibrating the very floorboards. "Mother, open this door! We need to talk! I know you're in there. Your car is in the garage." Dennis's voice was different now, not panicked, but cold and aggressive. I didn't move. I remained on the back patio, concealed from the entrance, observing the butterflies flitting around the lavender I had planted last spring. It was astonishing how much beauty I had missed while drowning in their financial drama. "Clara!" Now it was Serena's voice, sharp and demanding. "We know you're avoiding us. Stop behaving like a petulant child and come out here and face the consequences of your actions." Face them? As if I were the perpetrator, the one who owed the explanation after years of sustained emotional and financial exploitation. The breathtaking audacity of their projection nearly made me laugh out loud. The banging intensified. I heard the dull thud of a shoe followed by a metallic shutter. They were assaulting my solid oak front door, the very door my late husband Arthur had installed with meticulous care 20 years ago. "This is ludicrous," Serena shrieked. "You made us look like absolute vagrants in front of Mrs. Davenport." Her driver had to pay the tab. A 70-year-old woman digging through her purse because her lunatic daughter-in-law is having a breakdown. So, Mrs. Davenport had played the reluctant hero. I imagined the scene vividly. Dennis sweating through his custom-tailored shirt, Serena spinning a web of increasingly frantic lies, and the formidable Mrs. Davenport reluctantly salvaging their shattered image. The public humiliation, I had to admit, was exquisitely deserved. "Mother, please." Dennis's voice was now laced with genuine, desperate tears. "People were taking photos. This is going to be viral. Our entire reputation is over." Viral, of course. That was the central anxiety. Not the emotional wound they had inflicted, not the crossing of a profound moral line, but the potential damage to their public narrative. Their entire universe was constructed on appearances, supported by my invisible funds. The pounding ceased momentarily. I heard their voices drop to furious, urgent whispers. They were clearly strategizing. I knew Serena well enough to anticipate the next phase, the calculated shift from brute force to saccharine, manipulative plea. "Clara." Serena's voice transformed, achieving an impossible pitch of softness. "I know you're hurt and you have every right to be. Perhaps what I said yesterday was insensitive. But you know I didn't mean it maliciously. I was just letting off steam, venting with my circle. You know how we women are when we get together." Her theatrical speed of transformation was mesmerizing. From the woman kicking my door, she instantly morphed into the understanding. Apologetic daughter-in-law who had simply committed a minor communication error. "Mother," Dennis followed, adopting his most fragile, contrite tone. "I understand we wounded you." Serena explained what transpired. "You are justified in your anger. But cutting us off completely doesn't solve anything. It only makes things exponentially worse for everyone. For everyone. Not for me, of course. Always for their comfort, their stability, their preferred status quo. My emotional well-being was still entirely absent from the equation. Please, Mother. We can fix this. We can implement major changes, but I need you to reinstate the accounts today. My insurance premium is due Monday. Serena has critical medical appointments this week. We cannot simply be rendered destitute overnight. rendered destitute, as if my money were their birthright, as if their financial solvency was perpetually my responsibility. In that illuminating moment, I realized with perfect clarity that they genuinely saw no distinction between my money and theirs. In their minds, my pension and investments were merely a communal pool, not the product of decades of sacrifice by a woman who had already paid her debt to the world. "Clara, please think about the collateral damage," Serena attempted, pivoting to a pseudo-motherly tone. "What will your colleagues think when they find out you've cut off your only son? What will the church community say? Your reputation will be ruined." The church. The social circle. It was always the same leverage, using my external image, my social standing, as a cudgel against my personal dignity, as if the opinion of those who knew nothing of the abuse was more important than my own truth. "Look, Mother," Dennis said, his voice dropping into a serious, calculated pitch. "I acknowledge you want us to adjust our habits. We can discuss realistic boundaries, but this abrupt, hostile move is nothing short of emotional manipulation." Emotional manipulation. The words reverberated in my study like a thunderclap. I was the manipulative one? After years of subtle blackmail, of their using my profound maternal love as a means to systematically drain my accounts? The projection was so bald, so egregious that it momentarily stunned me. The knocking started again, fainter this time. They were finally realizing that brute force was futile. I heard footsteps moving away, circling the house, searching for a visible window. "Clara!" Serena shrieked from outside my side window. "We saw your shadow. We know you're in there! Stop cowering like a coward! Coward!" There was the true Serena, the one who emerged when her carefully constructed sweetness failed. The woman who had publicly mocked me, who had groomed my son to see me as a resource, not a person. I rose from my chair and walked deliberately to the window she was standing beside. I pulled the curtain back just a fraction, enough for our eyes to meet through the polished glass. Her expression shifted instantaneously from fury to a sickening, calculated relief. "There you are," she exclaimed, a high, false chirp. "Come on, open the door. Let's talk this out like a family." I held her gaze for a long, quiet moment, feeling an unnerving, perfect calm. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, I closed the curtain. I heard Serena's sharp, strangled shriek of pure frustration, followed by renewed, desperate pounding, this time against the glass of the window. I didn't flinch. I returned to my patio chair, silencing my constantly ringing phone. For the first time in years, my home felt truly, genuinely my own. The shouting and banging continued for another hour, slowly, incrementally losing its intensity, its conviction. I could hear fragments of their increasingly frustrated conversation, desperate schemes and counter-schemes. Serena suggested calling a locksmith to force entry, but Dennis, ever cautious about public perception, reminded her that was a felony, breaking and entering. Even in their spiraling panic, they wouldn't risk real legal jeopardy. Finally, I heard the satisfying double slam of the car doors and the swift, aggressive growl of the electric engine pulling away. But I was not naive. I knew this was far from over. Serena's arsenal of emotional tactics was vast, and her immediate departure meant she was already formulating a more sophisticated, more devastating response. My phone came back to life at 3:00 p.m. with a barrage of calls from unknown numbers. First, it was Mrs. Davenport herself, Serena's mother. Her tone was polite, cultured, and utterly chilling. "Clara, my dear, I believe there has been a grievous misunderstanding. Serena tells me you are behaving quite erratically. I'm certain we can resolve this like civilized adults." I hung up without uttering a syllable. Then came the call from my sister, Elaine, who lives 2 states away and had clearly received a thoroughly scrubbed, heavily victim-edited version of events. "Clara," Dennis just called me, terribly worried. "He says you're acting unlike yourself, that you stranded them at a very public restaurant. Are you ill? Is your medication right?" "I am perfectly fine, Elaine," I replied, the calm permeating my voice. "In fact, I am better than I have been in a decade. But I don't understand. Dennis says you canceled all their cards without warning. That doesn't sound like the generous Clara I know. You've always been so unconditionally supportive of your family. Perhaps, I mused, looking up at the azure sky. That was the central problem, Elaine. Perhaps I was too generous for far too long. But Clara, they are your family. Serena claims you are punishing them over an innocent little joke. Surely you can just sit down and talk this through. An innocent little joke. It was impressive, the speed and efficacy with which Serena had rewritten the history of the event. A cruel public humiliation in front of their entire social circle had been transformed into a minor misunderstanding caused by my oversensitivity. Elaine, I asked directly, cutting through the manipulation, have you ever felt like a functional ATM for your children? Well, no, of course not. Why would you ask that? Because that is exactly what I became to Dennis and Serena. And yesterday, I finally acknowledged it. Clara, you are exaggerating. Parents are supposed to support their adult children. It's normal. Is it normal to pay your 40-year-old son's luxury office rent for years? Is it normal to finance their international leisure trips while you are left alone year after year? Is it normal for them to mock your generosity in your own home? Elaine fell silent, the weight of the undeniable truth pressing on her. Well, perhaps they took a little advantage, but this absolute, immediate cutoff seems incredibly drastic. Do you know what is drastic, Elaine? Working until the age of 65 to secure a decent future, only to discover your son is aggressively spending that future while you are still alive. That, my sister, is drastic. After that conversation, I took the final step. I unplugged my landline and switched my cell phone to airplane mode. I craved silence, a necessary void in which to process the magnitude of my decision and plan my next, vital steps. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, a small, carefully seasoned fillet and fresh steamed asparagus, I realized something profound. For the first time in months, there was no anxiety, no dread of the imminent call asking for money, no low thrum of worry. More critically, the guilt was absent. All my life, I had been conditioned to feel a crippling sense of obligation and guilt whenever I failed to meet the demands of my family. This time, that corrosive, familiar emotion was nowhere to be found. Instead, I felt a deep, cleansing mental clarity. I realized I had been living in a suffocating emotional fog, a smog generated by years of denial. Every interaction, every decision over the past decade, replayed in my mind like a documentary, revealing the relentless, predictable cycle of abuse. The cycle. Dennis or Serena would approach with an urgent financial opportunity or crisis. I would offer token resistance. They would employ crushing emotional leverage. It's just this once. We're desperate. What will our social circle think? I would yield. They would solve the immediate problem and immediately revert to their profligate lifestyle. There was never a genuine repayment plan, never sincere acknowledgement, and certainly never an invitation to share in the bounty of my own generosity. I paid for their luxury cruises but stayed home. I financed their expensive dinners at the Grande Bistro but ate alone. I covered Serena's designer medical appointments, but no one ever inquired about my chronic arthritis. I walked to my study, pulling the heavy, dust-covered filing box that contained my financial history. It was time to perform the true accounting, to quantify the exact toll this dependency had taken. I laid out 5 years of bank statements and investment reports and began calculating. The figure that emerged was devastating. $112,000. $112,000 over 5 years. This didn't even account for the years before, when I hadn't kept such meticulous records. It was nearly 3/4 of my entire disposable pension savings, more than many young couples earn in 3 years combined. But the true searing pain wasn't the number itself. It was the realization that in exchange for that $112,000, I had received only mockery, indifference, and the cold, transactional treatment of a financial instrument. As I reviewed the electronic statements, I discovered something that caused my entire body to tremble with renewed rage. They hadn't just used the accounts for major purchases. They had been running a host of minor, persistent shadow charges. Dennis's high-frequency stock trading platform subscriptions, Serena's exclusive country club membership fees, and several premium, exotic delivery services I never utilized. These were small monthly withdrawals, meticulously designed to go unnoticed, yet they added up to thousands annually. Money was being siphoned automatically to fund luxuries I was deliberately excluded from enjoying. That night, I made the final, profound decision regarding my future legacy. I retrieved my last will and testament from the safe deposit box. I had drafted the document 5 years prior, in a time when I still believed I was protecting the future of a grateful, loving family. Dennis was the sole beneficiary: the house, the investments, the life insurance, everything. But now I viewed that document through the cold lens of betrayal. Why should I bequeath my entire life's work to a man who had already aggressively spent more than half of it while I was still perfectly capable? Why reward the very behavior that had cost me my dignity and peace? The next morning, I would call my attorney. It was time for a radical, immediate modification of my estate plan. If Dennis insisted on treating me like a bank, he would now have to be content with collecting the interest, not the principal, and only under conditions of his own. Sustained financial maturity. I slept better that night than I had in years. The sleep was deep, restorative, and entirely devoid of the familiar maternal anxiety. For the first time, my decision-making was focused purely on self-preservation. Friday morning brought an energy I hadn't felt since my retirement celebration. It was a day dedicated entirely to my priorities. First the attorney, then the bank. Finally, perhaps, I would buy myself something frivolous, a small, beautiful luxury with the money that would typically have been earmarked for Dennis's latest, manufactured crisis. As I plugged the landline back in and prepared a leisurely breakfast, the answering machine light flashed incessantly, 14 new messages. I listened to them over my coffee, each one confirming the absolute righteousness of my actions. Message 1. Serena, tearful. Clara, it's Serena. Please, you have to stop this. Dennis didn't sleep at all. He's so worried about your mental state. He says he's never seen you like this. Call us. Message 2. Dennis, desperate. Mother, I went to the bank this morning. They told me you closed the family stability account you funded for us. Why would you do that? That account was ours. The possessiveness was staggering. He still referred to my money as ours. That account had never been jointly held. It was a unilateral contribution I made for their supposed emergencies, which invariably materialized as luxury vacations, designer clothes, or exorbitant networking functions. Message 3. Elaine. Patronizing. Clara, Dennis called me again. He says you're moving assets, and he's concerned about your decision-making. Are you absolutely certain this isn't an overreaction? You're being very radical. The subsequent messages followed the predictable trajectory: feigned concern, veiled questions regarding my sanity, and saccharine pleas disguised as sisterly or familial advice. Message 11 caught my attention. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unctuous and familiar. Mrs. Whitlock, this is Oscar, Serena's cousin's husband. Look, I know we don't know each other well, but Serena asked me to call. She's worried you're acting erratically. As a man, I think women sometimes overcomplicate things. Why don't you just forgive and forget? Family is the most important thing. Family is the most important thing. A remarkably convenient philosophy when it serves to maintain the status quo that benefits the speaker. I wondered if Oscar would be so quick to preach forgiveness if his wife publicly mocked him while simultaneously draining his retirement fund. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called my attorney, Mr. Coleman. His secretary informed me he had an immediate cancellation and could see me at 2 p.m. that afternoon. Perfect. I then called my bank manager and scheduled an immediate appointment to review all my accounts and implement additional impregnable security protocols. I wanted absolute assurance that neither Dennis nor Serena had any method, legal or otherwise, of accessing my financial data or information. As I was preparing to leave the house, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole, half expecting the siege to resume, but saw my neighbor, Lucy. Lucy, a woman 2 years my junior, had been widowed shortly after Arthur. We were friendly across the garden fence, but she had never formally visited. "Good morning, Clara," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I heard a tremendous amount of noise and shouting yesterday morning. I just wanted to be sure you were completely all right." I invited her in and brewed her a fresh cup of coffee. It was profoundly refreshing to have someone in my home who was not there to manipulate me or demand money. "You seem quite composed," Lucy observed, her eyes reflecting genuine concern. "Yesterday, your son and his wife were here for almost 2 hours, shouting and beating on your front door. I was honestly about to call the police." I told her the essential truth of the situation, not the intricate financial details, but enough for her to grasp the emotional dynamic. Lucy listened without a single interruption, nodding occasionally, her face a canvas of sympathy and growing indignation. "Clara," she said when I finished, "I have a confession. For years I've watched the way they operate. I've seen them arrive in brand new, gleaming cars, dressed in expensive labels, talking on the latest, most oversized phones. Meanwhile, you are still driving that 10-year-old sedan and shopping exclusively at the discount grocer." Her words struck me with the force of external, objective truth. It was the confirmation of something I had spent a decade desperately trying to rationalize away. Others could see the toxic disparity that I had refused to acknowledge. "But what has always struck me the most," Lucy continued, her voice soft but firm, "is that I have never once seen them perform an act of service for you. Never seen them help with your heavy groceries, fix a small item in your yard, or simply visit without the request for money hanging in the air. Is it truly that obvious?" I asked, a mixture of shame and relief washing over me. To an outsider, yes. But I understand why you couldn't see it. When you are a mother, you are programmed to believe the best, the most generous possible version of your children. Lucy stayed for another hour. Our conversation was the most honest, liberating exchange I had experienced in months. She shared her own similar struggles with adult children who viewed her as their retirement plan, and how, after her own husband's death, she had learned to draw hard, inviolable boundaries. "You know what helped me the most?" she asked, rising to leave. Realizing that being a good mother does not, in any definition, mean being a financial martyr. You can love your children without sacrificing your entire dignity for their comfort. Her words resonated in my mind as I drove to the bank. In the manager's sterile office, we implemented all the new fortress-like security measures. I changed every password, introduced multi-factor authentication, and ensured that no one, especially Dennis, had access to any information about my finances, account balances, or future transactions. "Mrs. Whitlock," the manager said, using my late husband's name as he finalized the changes, "may I ask about the necessity of such drastic measures? Do you have a specific security concern?" "Let's just say," I replied, signing the final document with a flourish, "that I finally realized my single biggest financial security risk resides within my own family." The manager nodded, his face softening with understanding. "It is tragically more common than you might believe, ma'am. We see many cases of financial exploitation of older adults by their own relatives. You are doing the profoundly right thing by protecting yourself." After the bank, I performed another act of quiet rebellion. I drove to a charming, intimate French bistro downtown that I had always admired but never allowed myself to enter, deeming it too frivolous an expense. I sat alone at a window table, ordered the most expensive coq au vin on the menu, a crisp glass of Sauvignon Blanc, and a decadent triple chocolate pastry. This entire bill came to $55 less than Dennis, and Serena routinely spent on a single round of cocktails during one of their networking outings. As I savored the rich, savory flavors, I realized something critical. It had been years since I had enjoyed a meal without the constant, gnawing anxiety of mental arithmetic. I was perpetually calculating, how much is this costing? Will I have to transfer funds to cover Dennis's deficit next week? Can I afford this tiny personal indulgence? For the first time, I was eating with true, unadulterated appetite and peace of mind. My appointment with Mr. Coleman, the attorney, was revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. When I explained the entire situation, including Serena's mother's veiled threat regarding my mental competency, he showed absolutely no surprise. He merely leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, reviewing the initial will, "we drafted this 5 years ago. It designates your son, Dennis, as the sole beneficiary of your entire estate. You are certain you wish to implement significant changes?" "Completely certain," I affirmed, meeting his gaze. "Over these 5 years, I have witnessed Dennis's true entitled character. He has proven he does not value my generosity. Furthermore, he has already, in practical terms, spent 3/4 of his inheritance while I am still alive." "I understand your decision perfectly," Mr. Coleman said. "Regarding the threat of a competency challenge, let me reassure you. To have an individual declared legally incompetent requires solid, overwhelming medical evidence and an extensive public legal process. The act of responsibly protecting one's assets from familial exploitation demonstrates competence, not the opposite." He did, however, issue a vital warning. "I strongly advise you to document everything. Log every threatening call. Keep records of every instance of financial exploitation you can quantify. And, as a precautionary measure, I recommend you obtain a preventative psychological evaluation now. A dated, sealed report confirming your mental clarity will instantly neutralize any spurious legal challenge they might attempt." That night, for the first time since the initial confrontation, I felt a flicker of fear. Not fear of being wrong, but fear of the sheer, ruthless extent to which they might be willing to go to seize control of my resources. But that fear was quickly eclipsed by a burning, resolute determination. Their audacity had merely solidified my path. The next day, Saturday, I followed Mr. Coleman's sage advice to the letter. I contacted a private psychiatric clinic and scheduled a complete psychological evaluation. The doctor, a sharp, perceptive woman in her 50s, listened patiently as I recounted the entire narrative. "Mrs. Whitlock," she stated calmly after 2 hours of testing and comprehensive interviews, "allow me to be perfectly clear. You are demonstrating exceptional mental lucidity. Recognizing patterns of abuse, establishing healthy, necessary boundaries, and protecting your long-term financial stability are not indicators of decline. In fact, they are the hallmarks of a thoroughly competent mind. You are quite simply acting more rationally now than you were when you allowed the exploitation to continue." She provided me with an official, detailed report documenting my complete mental competence, dated and sealed. It was my ironclad insurance policy against the legal avarice of Dennis and Serena. When I returned home, I saw Lucy tending her magnificent rose bushes. She hurried to the fence line, a worried frown etched on her face. "Clara, a very well-dressed elderly woman, stopped by yesterday, asking questions about you. She wanted to know if you had been acting erratically lately. I told her you looked happier and more relaxed than I'd seen you in years." I recounted Mrs. Davenport's visit and her thinly veiled legal threat. Lucy listened with deepening indignation. "That is utterly beyond belief," she exclaimed. "Attempting to have you declared incompetent because you won't give them your money? That is the most despicable act I've ever heard of. What truly bothers me," I confessed, "is that they genuinely believe they are entitled to my assets. They don't see it as my savings. They see it as their inheritance, paid in advance." "You know what you need, Clara?" Lucy said, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "You need to truly enjoy this freedom you fought for. When was the last time you did something purely, selfishly for yourself?" She was right. I had spent so many years organizing my life around their demands and emergencies that the very concept of personal pleasure felt alien, almost sinful. "There is a 5-day luxury cruise leaving next Wednesday," Lucy continued conspiratorially. "I was supposed to go with my sister, but she had a last-minute medical issue. Would you be interested in joining me?" The idea sent a sudden, thrilling jolt through me. A week away, a week of silence, of being served instead of serving, of looking at something other than my strained bank account statements. A week without fear of the next phone call. I would absolutely love to, I replied without the slightest hesitation. That afternoon we booked the trip. $2,800 per person for 5 days, all-inclusive. It was a fraction of the cost of Dennis and Serena's last weekend trip to Napa, but this time, the investment was solely in my own mental health and enjoyment. As I began sorting through my clothes for the trip, my thoughts drifted back to the genesis of this decade of dependency, the subtle erosion of boundaries that led to total collapse. Dennis's first startup, a dubious app for locating artisan coffee shops, had failed spectacularly, leaving him with $30,000 in personal debt and a severe crisis of ego. "Mother, it's not my fault. The market wasn't ready," he'd pleaded. He didn't ask for a loan. He requested bridge funding so he could maintain his lifestyle while he engineered his next big pivot. Serena, always the pragmatist, had framed it as an investment in his future stability. I had given in, not just out of love, but out of fear. The primal fear of watching my son flounder, of him being labeled a failure by the judgmental world. That fear became their currency. I recalled the photographs they had sent me from their Maldives honeymoon. Serena, tanned and flawless in a white silk dress, Dennis with a smug, satisfied smirk, posing in front of an impossibly turquoise ocean. The caption on the text message: "So grateful for the opportunity to recharge." We deserved this. They had truly believed they deserved the money and that I deserved the solitude. I had looked at the photos, standing alone in my kitchen, eating a tin of soup, and felt a profound, hollow ache. I had paid for their happiness, and in return, I was excluded, not just from the destination, but from the very concept of deserved rest, the stagnation. While their lives accelerated, new cars, new homes, new businesses, my own life had become a slow, ossified loop. My garden, which Arthur and I had tended so lovingly, was slowly overgrown. My book club meetings were often cut short because I had to be available for Dennis's emergency wire transfers. I canceled my own long-planned trip to the Grand Canyon because Dennis suddenly needed $5,000 to cover unexpected regulatory fees. In their pursuit of their inflated, impossible lifestyle, they had not only drained my bank account, they had drained my very time and potential. They had stolen the last precious years of my active retirement. I sat on the edge of my bed, folding a light linen blouse. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was lined, but my eyes now held a fierce, unsettling spark of purpose. The old Clara, the passive financial enabler, was gone, replaced by a warrior who had finally discovered her enemy was not external debt, but internal denial. This deep self-reflection fortified me for the inevitable next attack. I knew Dennis would return. The car insurance premium, the very real, non-negotiable consequence, was due on Monday. Their ability to function as successful adults was about to collide with cold, hard reality. Sunday morning, while I was mentally rehearsing my final packing list, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. It was Dennis. He was alone this time, and the contrast between the cocky entrepreneur of 2 days ago and the figure standing on my porch was shocking. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, with deep dark circles. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, and his posture was one of utter defeat. "Mother," he managed, his voice barely a rasp. "Please, we need to talk. Not with Serena, not with the shouting. Just you and me." I let him in, but I maintained a careful, strategic emotional distance. The old Clara would have rushed to comfort him, to solve the visible pain. This new Clara observed him with clinical, detached precision. I knew this was his last desperate attempt at the familiar manipulation. "Mother, I'm desperate," he began, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "The insurance for the Tesla is due tomorrow. I don't have the funds. If I don't renew, I can't legally drive. And without the car, I can't get to the new co-working space I just leased." "How much is the premium?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of sympathy. $320, and how much did you earn last month? About $4,500 after taxes, but what, Dennis? But you have rent? Food, utilities, and what else exactly devours the rest of $4,500? Dennis hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously around the room, avoiding my steady gaze. Mother, you don't understand. Living is expensive. Living is expensive, Dennis, I countered. When you systematically maintain a lifestyle that is 3 tiers above your actual income bracket. Tell me one thing honestly. How much did you spend on artisanal coffee and high-end delivery services last month? I don't know. Maybe a few $100s. That's different, Mother. Those are basic business necessities. Networking requires premium locations. A $7 latte is a basic necessity. A $500 monthly fee for a luxury co-working space you use twice a week is a necessity? No, Dennis. Those are wants you convinced yourself were needs, and you delegated the actual needs, like, say, car insurance, to me. There was the fundamental disconnect. Laid bare. Dennis genuinely believed that luxury was a prerequisite for modern life, and that the financial gap required to sustain that luxury was, by default, my responsibility. Dennis, I said, leaning forward slightly, forcing his focus. You are 40 years old. You possess a master's degree. You have marketable skills, despite your lack of business success. Why, fundamentally, can you not pay a $320 car insurance bill? Because the money is simply not left after everything else, he exclaimed, his frustration boiling over. Then you must cut back on everything else. It's not that easy. You can't just slash expenses like that. We have an image to maintain. A fabricated life you cannot afford, but one I have always been there to prop up. I finished his thought for him. There was the true, unvarnished claim. He wasn't requesting temporary assistance. He was asserting what he believed was his permanent right. In his entitled worldview, I was a fixed component of his financial infrastructure. Dennis, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I require 3 honest, non-defensive answers. In these past 12 years, have you and Serena ever sat down to create a rigorous, honest budget and genuinely tried to live solely on your combined salaries? He stared at the carpet. Silence. Have you ever considered downsizing to a more affordable apartment that doesn't scream successful entrepreneur? Silence. Have you ever voluntarily and with sustained effort cut back on your lifestyle expenses so you wouldn't have to resort to asking me for money? Mother, those are cruel and unfair questions. He finally burst out. Unfair? It is unfair to ask a 40-year-old man if he has attempted to live within his own means. You don't comprehend the social pressure. Serena has expectations. Her friends judge us. We can't look poor. And when? I asked, my voice gaining a powerful, quiet resonance. Did you ever consider that my financial expectations, my pressure, and my long-term needs mattered to anyone but me? For the first time in the entire tortured history of our dynamic, Dennis was utterly, profoundly silent. I could see the wheels turning in his eyes, processing a concept that had never once crossed his privileged consciousness. Mother, he finally whispered, his voice softer, devoid of its usual entitlement. I never truly considered the pressure you were under. Really? You never wondered how I could fund your exorbitant lifestyle while I ate modest meals and wore the same coat for 8 years. You never wondered why I never bought new furnishings, but the funds were always available for your emergencies? Tears finally genuinely welled in his eyes, blurring the image of his expensive shirt. I truly thought you liked helping us. I thought it was your way of showing love now that Dad was gone. And it was, Dennis. Initially. But you and Serena transmuted my love into an obligation. You warped my generosity into a non-negotiable expectation. And ultimately, you used my financial sacrifice as a cause for public mockery. Mother, what Serena's comment was the final devastating straw, Dennis. But the glass had been overflowing for years. He cried silently, shoulders shaking for several minutes. When he finally spoke, the tone was startlingly different, raw, vulnerable, and genuinely mature. What can I possibly do to fix this? You can start by finding a way to pay for your own car insurance by tomorrow morning. Dennis remained in my living room for another hour. We did not speak much more, but I watched him. For the first time, He seemed to be truly reflecting on his actions and their corrosive effects, rather than simply scrambling for a transactional solution. When he finally stood up, his gaze was steady. "Mother, I will secure a personal loan today, and Serena and I are going to have a serious, terrifying talk about our expenses. I want you to know that." I didn't entirely believe him, but it was, undeniably, the first flicker of genuine accountability I had ever witnessed. Monday morning. As I packed the final items for my Wednesday cruise departure, I received an unexpected call. It was Serena, but her tone was radically different, soft, controlled, entirely devoid of her usual aggressive urgency. "Clara," she said, her voice quiet. "I know things are fractured. Could we meet for coffee?" Without Dennis, without the dramatics, just the two of us. I agreed, driven more by anthropological curiosity than any genuine hope for reconciliation. We met at a discreet coffee shop away from the high-end mall she usually frequented. Serena arrived dressed simply, wearing minimal jewelry. She looked tired, her flawless makeup showing signs of strain, but she was also undeniably more grounded. "Clara," she began after we ordered our lattes, "I want to offer a completely unconditional apology for what I said last week. It was vile, disrespectful, and totally unacceptable. I was wrong." "What prompted this change of heart, Serena?" I asked directly. The humiliation at the Grande Bistro initially. But more than that, the last few days of facing our financial reality without your safety net have been terrifying. I realized something truly frightening. And what was that? That we have absolutely no idea how to live within our means. We have been living, quite literally, as if we were multimillionaires for years, because you systematically financed the massive chasm between our inflated income expectations and our actual, paltry salaries. It was the first truly honest, raw, and self-aware confession I had ever heard from her. "Yesterday," she continued, taking a shaky breath, "Dennis and I sat down and made a real budget. Just our salaries. No projected startup windfalls. No bridge funding from you. Do you know what we discovered? Tell me. That we are spending nearly double what we earn. Double, Clara, not just a little over. And you covered that difference, effortlessly, for years. And what is your plan now? We are being forced to make drastic changes. Our current apartment, which is $2,200 a month, is utterly unsustainable. Based on our income, we should be paying $1,500 at most. We have to break the lease and move next month. We have no choice. And Dennis is on board with this? He fought it violently at first. But when he saw the spreadsheet, when he saw the numbers in black and white, he had no leverage left. We are also canceling my country club, his premium business accounts, and we are fundamentally changing how we socialize. Serena paused, looking down at her hands. "Clara, I need to ask you something difficult. Please be completely honest. When did you start to genuinely resent our financial dependence?" The directness of the question surprised me again. The resentment, I think, grew slowly, but it crystallized when I realized that you had stopped asking for my help and simply started expecting it, taking it as your due. And when exactly did that switch happen? When the supplemental credit cards became a normal, everyday tool. When my investment portfolio became your automatic, consequence-free emergency fund. At some point, you both stopped viewing me as a person who was helping you and started viewing me as a continuous, easily accessible resource. Serena nodded slowly, her face etched with shame. You are completely correct. We didn't see the distinction anymore. We were living a financial fantasy. Is there any path forward for us, Clara? Can we ever rebuild our relationship? I will be entirely honest with you, Serena. The relationship we had before is dead. It was based on a toxic, unsustainable dynamic where I gave and you took. If we are to build anything new, it must be on a foundation of absolute mutual respect, and most importantly, your sustained financial independence. Does that mean you will never help us again? It means that if you ever need real, genuine help, a catastrophic event, after you have consistently demonstrated that you can live responsibly on your own, we can discuss it. But it would be aid, not a permanent subsidy. How long would we have to prove our independence? It is not a test with a deadline, Serena. It is a fundamental, permanent change in your lives. If you can maintain a balanced budget, live within your true means, and successfully build your own emergency savings for a sustained period, then you will have proven genuine maturity. Your luxury vacations, your expensive dining, you will have to earn those yourselves. Like the vast majority of people. Serena looked genuinely overwhelmed. The reality of the situation finally crushing the fantasy. Clara, I am not sure Dennis and I know how to live like that. Then it is past time you learned. You have the education, the jobs, and the skills. The only thing you have ever lacked is the genuine motivation to be independent. We finished our coffees in a long, contemplative silence. As we rose, Serena's final words were the most mature I had ever heard her utter. Clara, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I have learned one vital lesson this week. And that is? That being an adult isn't just about reaching an adult age. It's about taking on adult responsibility. We have been playing house while you carried the crushing weight of the real mortgage. That night, as I completed my packing, I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. I hadn't lost a family. I had shed a toxic dynamic that was slowly, systematically destroying all of us. If Dennis and Serena truly wanted change, they would have to prove it through rigorous, sustained action. On Tuesday, I received a short text message from Dennis. Mother, I secured a personal loan to cover the insurance premium. We signed a lease on a much smaller, affordable apartment this morning. Moving next month? Just wanted you to know. It was a small, almost insignificant victory, but it was a tangible step toward the independence they desperately needed. That night, I slept soundly, knowing the next day would mark the beginning of my first genuinely personal adventure in decades. The cruise was a revelation. 5 days of waking up when I pleased, eating whatever I desired, and engaging in activities purely for my own enjoyment. Lucy proved to be the perfect companion, independent, witty, and mercifully free of generational financial drama. On the ship, I met other women my age who had navigated similar, harrowing journeys. During one formal dinner, a woman named Isabel told me how her 3 adult children had nearly drained her entire retirement fund before she finally found the courage to say, enough. What surprised me most, Isabel confided as we watched the sunset over the Pacific, was realizing I wasn't the only one. I thought it was a unique flaw of my family. But there's a whole generation of parents who simply didn't know how to say no to our adult children. When I returned home on Sunday, I felt fundamentally renewed. 5 days without a single call for money, without financial anxiety, without the crushing burden of solving other people's problems. It was like finding the key to a version of myself I thought was permanently lost. There were messages on my machine, but to my profound surprise, none were demands. Dennis had called twice, simply to ask if I had returned safely and if I had enjoyed the ocean view. Serena had left a short message. Hope your cruise was wonderful, Clara. We'd love to hear about it when you have time. Monday morning, Lucy came over with coffee and pastries to hear the full report. As we chatted on the patio, I saw Dennis's electric sedan pull into the driveway. This time, instead of aggressively heading for the door, he sat in the car for several minutes. When he finally rang the bell, his expression was different. Nervous, yes, but also undeniably more mature. Mother, he said when I opened the door. I know you just got back. Could we talk for a moment? I invited him in. Lucy, discreetly recognizing the importance of the moment, excused herself. Mother, I wanted to tell you what we've actually accomplished this week, Dennis began. Serena and I found a smaller apartment. We're paying $700 less per month in rent, effective immediately. We signed the lease today. And how does the change feel? It was excruciating at first. The neighborhood isn't prestigious and the space is cramped. But after a few days of looking at the budget, I realized something important. I can sleep peacefully knowing we are paying for everything with our own money. The constant low-level anxiety of not knowing how we were going to cover next month's inflated expenses is finally gone, was the first time I had heard Dennis articulate his own stress regarding the unsustainability of his life. It had never occurred to me that he, too, was suffering under the weight of his own financial delusion. We also canceled the co-working lease and his expensive trading platform subscriptions, he continued. And Serena, this was her idea, found a consistent part-time remote job on weekends to generate reliable extra income. Serena is working more? Yes. She said she wants to contribute actively to our finances instead of just managing money that comes from other places. I was stunned by her initiative. Mother, I also wanted to offer a formal apology, not just for 2 weeks ago, but for the last decade. I truly never grasped that I was treating you like a financial instrument. Like an ATM. What made you finally realize it? When we had to build the first real budget, I realized I had no concept of the true cost of living. My entire adult life, I'd been operating in a bubble, living exponentially beyond my means because you were always there, effortlessly covering the deficit. Dennis paused, looking me directly in the eye. Mother, I want you to know that these last few days have been the first in years where I actually feel like a responsible adult. Making my own decisions, solving my own problems, being accountable for the consequences. And how does that feel, Dennis? Terrifying, but mostly liberating. I didn't know how much weight I was carrying until I was forced to put it down. The weight of knowing, deep down, that I wasn't truly independent. The weight of knowing my lifestyle was a financial lie. The phrase "the weight of knowing" struck me deeply. For years, I had assumed I was the only one suffering under the weight of that toxic dynamic. But Dennis, too, had been burdened by guilt and an existential anxiety rooted in his own dependence. Mother, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but there's something I need to request. Do you think we could ever have a truly normal relationship? One where I visit you because I love you and care about you, not because I need something from you? The question moved me profoundly because it acknowledged the fundamental necessary distinction. Dennis, that relationship can begin today, if you genuinely want it to. I have always wanted a son who visits me because he values my presence, not my utility. So, Dennis said, a tentative, hopeful smile touching his lips, would you be open to Serena and I coming over for lunch this Sunday? We'll buy the groceries, we'll cook, and we'll just spend time together. I would love that, I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking through my composure. After Dennis left, I sat in the silent living room reflecting on the absolute, seismic transformation that had occurred in just 2 weeks. I had lost my role as the family's passive financial savior, but I had gained something immeasurably more valuable. My self-respect, my personal freedom, and the genuine possibility of a relationship with my son built on honesty, not commerce. That evening, I called Mr. Coleman again. After the conversation with Dennis, I wanted to adjust my estate plans once more. Instead of punishing him permanently, I wanted to create a structure that rewarded proven maturity over time. Mr. Coleman, I explained, I want to create a tiered inheritance based on independent financial performance. A trust that incentivizes sustained responsibility. Mrs. Whitlock, the lawyer replied, sounding intrigued, you are proposing a performance-based structure. Excellent. If Dennis can demonstrate verifiable financial solvency, living within his means, paying taxes, no dependency, for 2 consecutive years, he receives a defined portion. If he continues that pattern for 5 years, he receives the house and the full principal. But if he reverts to his old habits, the inheritance reverts to a designated charitable foundation. Precisely, I confirmed. It incentivizes long-term structural personal growth. It gives him a goal, not just a handout. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in years, I was planning my future based on hope. Hope that my son had truly learned and grown. Hope that our relationship could genuinely heal. And hope that my final years would be lived with dignity and self-determination. I walked out to my patio, the quiet evening air enveloping me. I looked up at the immense, indifferent canopy of stars. In the distance, I heard the gentle, consistent trickle of the water fountain I had installed last year. A small, personal luxury I had allowed myself only after years of debating whether I deserved to spend that money on my own comfort. Now, I knew the answer with absolute certainty. I had always deserved to treat myself with the exact same boundless generosity and respect I had once foolishly showered upon others. The greatest inheritance you can leave is the example of dignity and boundaries. Took me 72 years and won $12,000 in stolen peace to learn the simplest truth of motherhood. Your intrinsic value is not a commodity. The icy betrayal was the seismic event that cleared the toxic fog, revealing a path to self-respect I never knew existed. I found freedom when I finally had the courage to tell my own son, "You are an adult. Solve your own problem." If you have ever felt your heart break under the weight of financial obligation, let my story be your battle cry. Love them fiercely, but protect yourself relentlessly. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I have many more stories of redemption waiting for you.